Captain Sarah Mitchell had always been different from other Marines. At 28, she carried herself with the kind of quiet confidence that came from proving herself in a world where women like her were still fighting for respect. Her auburn hair was always pulled back in a regulation bun, and her green eyes held a sharpness that could cut through the thickest tension in any room. She had earned her place in the United States Marine Corps through sheer determination, countless hours of training, and an unwavering commitment to excellence that left even her harshest critics speechless. The morning sun cast long shadows across Camp Pendleton as Sarah walked toward the briefing room, her polished boots clicking against the concrete with military precision. She had been stationed here for 8 months now, and while she had gained the respect of most of her fellow officers, there were still moments when she felt the weight of being one of the few female captains in her unit. The whispers followed her sometimes, not malicious, but curious, as if her presence was still something to be analyzed rather than simply accepted. Today was different, though. Today she would be meeting Captain Marcus Rodriguez, a decorated officer who had just transferred from the East Coast. Rodriguez had a reputation that preceded him, a brilliant tactical mind, a natural leader, and, according to the rumors, someone who didn't particularly care for the recent changes in Marine Corps policy regarding women in combat roles. Sarah had heard the stories about his old-school mentality, his belief that the Corps was becoming too soft, too concerned with political correctness rather than pure military effectiveness. As she entered the briefing room, Sarah immediately spotted Rodriguez. He was exactly what she had expected, tall, broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent in harsh conditions. His uniform was immaculate, his posture rigid, and when he turned to look at her, his dark eyes held a mixture of assessment and skepticism that Sarah had encountered many times before. "Captain Mitchell," Rodriguez said, extending his hand in a firm handshake. His voice was deep, commanding, with just a hint of a Texas accent. "I've heard quite a bit about you." "Captain Rodriguez," Sarah replied, meeting his grip with equal firmness. "Welcome to Pendleton. I hope the transition from Quantico hasn't been too difficult." Rodriguez's lips curved into what might have been a smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm adaptable, Captain. 22 years in the Corps teaches you that much." The briefing began with Colonel Thompson outlining their upcoming joint training exercise. It was to be a complex operation involving multiple units, simulating a rescue mission in hostile territory. Sarah would be leading the air support coordination, while Rodriguez would command the ground assault team. As Thompson spoke, Sarah could feel Rodriguez's eyes on her, studying her reactions, her note-taking, the way she asked questions. She had been through this evaluation process countless times before, but something about Rodriguez's scrutiny felt different, more intense, more personal. "Captain Mitchell," Colonel Thompson said, drawing her attention back to the briefing. "Your call sign for this operation will be Hawk 7. Captain Rodriguez, you'll be Viper 1. Sarah nodded, familiar with the routine of operational call signs. They were typically assigned based on aircraft, unit designations, or sometimes just random military phonetics. She had used dozens of different call signs over her career, most of them forgettable combinations of words and numbers that served their purpose and were quickly discarded once the mission ended. After the briefing, as officers filed out of the room discussing logistics and timing, Rodriguez approached Sarah. His expression had softened slightly, though wariness still lingered in his eyes. "So, Mitchell," he said, falling in a step beside her as they walked toward the motor pool. 28 years old, graduated top of your class at Officer Candidate School, deployed twice to Afghanistan, received a Navy Commendation Medal for actions under fire. That's quite a resume. Sarah glanced at him sideways, unsure whether his tone indicated respect or skepticism. "I've been fortunate to serve with excellent Marines, sir. Good leadership makes everyone look better." "Diplomatic answer," Rodriguez observed. "But I've read the after-action reports. The convoy ambush outside Kandahar. That was your quick thinking that saved those supply trucks. And the firebase defense in Helmand Province. Your coordination with air support prevented what could have been a catastrophic overrun. They had reached Sarah's vehicle, a dusty Humvee that had seen better days, but ran reliably. She turned to face Rodriguez fully, try to read the man behind the uniform. With respect, Captain, what exactly are you getting at? Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on something in the distance beyond the base perimeter. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that suggested deeper currents of thought. I've served with a lot of Marines, Mitchell. Men and women both. I've seen heroes and cowards, leaders and followers, those who rise to the occasion and those who crumble under pressure. What I've learned is that reputation and reality don't always align. He paused, turning to look directly at her. I'm curious to see which category you fall into when things get real. Sarah felt a flash of irritation, but kept her expression neutral. I suppose you'll find out during the exercise, won't you, sir? I suppose I will, Rodriguez replied. Then, unexpectedly, his expression shifted slightly, revealing what might have been the ghost of genuine respect. For what it's worth, Mitchell, the Marines I've spoken with who serve with you in Afghanistan, they speak very highly of you. That carries weight with me. As Rodriguez walked away, Sarah stood beside her Humvee, watching his retreating figure. She had dealt with skeptical colleagues before, but something about Marcus Rodriguez felt different. There was intelligence behind his wariness, a thoughtfulness that suggested his reservations weren't rooted in simple prejudice, but in something deeper, more complex. She found herself curious about his story, about the experiences that had shaped his perspective on leadership and the changing face of the Marine Corps. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation and training. Sarah threw herself into the mission planning with characteristic intensity, coordinating with air support units, studying satellite imagery of the training area, and rehearsing communication protocols. She was determined to prove herself not just to Rodriguez, but to herself. Every exercise was an opportunity to demonstrate competence, to show that she belonged in this brotherhood of warriors not because of any concession to political correctness, but because she had earned her place through skill and dedication. Rodriguez, meanwhile, proved to be as competent as his reputation suggested. His tactical planning was meticulous, his leadership style firm but fair, and his knowledge of military operations comprehensive. Sarah found herself grudgingly impressed by his professionalism, even as she remained aware of his continued observation of her performance. During joint planning sessions, he asked probing questions about her air support strategies, challenged her assumptions, and pushed her to consider alternative approaches. It was clear he was testing her, but the tests felt legitimate, focused on military competence rather than gender-based skepticism. The training exercise was scheduled to begin on a Tuesday morning. As Sarah conducted her final equipment checks and reviewed communication frequencies one last time, she couldn't shake the feeling that this operation would be different somehow, that it would mark a turning point in her relationship with Rodriguez and perhaps in her own understanding of leadership under pressure. She had no idea how prophetic that feeling would prove to be, or how a simple radio call sign would unlock memories and emotions that would change everything she thought she knew about the gruff Marine captain who had been watching her so carefully. The morning sun was rising over the California hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded her briefly of dawns in Afghanistan. And Sarah Mitchell prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead, unaware that the most significant challenge would come not from the simulated enemy, but from the unexpected revelation of shared history and unspoken loss. The morning of the exercise arrived with a crisp autumn chill that cut through the California air like a blade. Sarah had been awake since 04:30, running through final checks on communication equipment and reviewing weather reports that could affect air support operations. The training area stretched across 40 square miles of rugged terrain that closely mimicked the mountainous regions where both she and Rodriguez had previously served in combat. It was the kind of landscape that could make or break military careers, depending on how well officers adapted to its challenges. As Sarah made her way to the command post, she noticed Rodriguez already deep in conversation with his squad leaders. His voice carried across the morning air, calm and authoritative as he reviewed final tactical positions. There was something almost ritualistic about the way he prepared for operations, a methodical approach that spoke of years spent in situations where attention to detail meant the difference between life and death. Sarah found herself studying his mannerisms, the way he used his hands to illustrate tactical movements. The slight tension in his shoulders that suggested the weight of command had become second nature to him. The mission scenario was straightforward on paper, but complex in execution. A simulated down pilot was trapped behind enemy lines, injured and unable to move to an extraction point. Rodriguez's ground team would need to penetrate enemy territory, secure the pilot, and hold a defensive position until Sarah could coordinate air support for extraction. The opposing force consisted of Marines from another unit, experienced soldiers who would make the mission as difficult as possible within the safety constraints of the exercise. All stations, this is Control. The radio crackled to life. Exercise Thunderstorm is now live. I repeat, Thunderstorm is live. Sarah keyed her radio, falling into the familiar rhythm of military communications. Control, this is Hawk 7. Air support elements standing by. All frequencies clear and monitored. Hawk 7, Control copies. Viper 1, you are cleared to begin approach to target area. Rodriguez's voice came through the radio with professional clarity. Control, Viper 1. Ground element moving to initial position. Estimated time to target area, 25 minutes. The first phase of the operation proceeded smoothly. Sarah monitored multiple radio frequencies, tracking the movement of both friendly and opposing forces across the training area. Through her binoculars, she could see dust clouds in the distance where vehicles moved across the terrain, and occasionally caught glimpses of Marines moving through the brush and rock formations. The complexity of coordinating multiple moving elements while maintaining communication security reminded her of operations in Afghanistan, though here the stakes were measured in training evaluation rather than human lives. Rodriguez proved to be as competent in field operations as he had been in planning sessions. His radio communications were crisp and professional, his tactical decisions sound, and his ability to adapt to changing circumstances impressive. Sarah found herself appreciating his leadership style, firm when necessary, flexible when circumstances required adjustment, always focused on mission accomplishment and the safety of his Marines. Whatever personal reservations he might have had about her presence seemed to disappear when actual military operations were involved. Hawk 7, Viper 1. Rodriguez's voice came through the radio. We have eyes on the target area. Heavy opposition force presence, approximately squad-sized element in defensive positions. Request immediate air support for suppression mission. Sarah studied the tactical map, correlating Rodriguez's position with known opposition force locations. Viper 1, Hawk 7. I copy heavy opposition, squad-sized. Air support is available. Estimated time on station 3 minutes. Can you mark target area with smoke? Hawk 7, affirmative. Yellow smoke, 100 meters northeast of my position. Danger close clearance authorized. The next few minutes unfolded with the precision of a well-rehearsed dance. Sarah coordinated with the simulated air support elements, providing targeting information and ensuring clear fields of fire that wouldn't endanger Rodriguez's Marines. The opposition force responded aggressively, forcing Rodriguez to adjust his position multiple times while maintaining pressure on the objective. Through her headset, Sarah could hear the controlled intensity in Rodriguez's voice as he managed his team's movements while under simulated fire. Viper 1, Hawk 7. Air support on station, ready for final attack run. Confirm all friendly personnel are clear of target area. Hawk 7, Viper 1. All friendlies clear. You are cleared hot on yellow smoke. The simulated air strike went perfectly, with exercise controllers confirming successful suppression of the opposition force. Rodriguez's team immediately moved forward to secure the downed pilot, a role-playing Marine who had been positioned in a small ravine surrounded by thick brush. Sarah continued coordinating air support, monitoring for any signs of opposition reinforcements while preparing for the extraction phase of the mission. It was during this critical transition that the first sign of trouble appeared. Rodriguez's radio communications, previously clear and steady, began to show signs of stress that had nothing to do with tactical pressure. Hawk 7, Viper 1. His voice came through the radio, slightly strained. We have secured the package. Pilot is ambulatory, but requires immediate medical attention. Setting up defensive perimeter for extraction. Sarah noticed the change in his tone immediately. Something in Rodriguez's voice carried an edge of emotional tension that seemed disproportionate to the current tactical situation. She had heard that kind of strain before in Afghanistan, when past experiences suddenly intruded on present circumstances, creating psychological pressure that could be more dangerous than enemy fire. Viper 1, Hawk 7. Copy package secured. Extraction helicopter will be on station in 15 minutes. Medical team standing by. Hawk 7. Rodriguez's voice came through the radio again, but this time there was a longer pause than normal. Hawk 7. We're going to need that extraction ASAP. Package is... The pilot is in worse condition than initially reported. Sarah frowned, checking her notes. According to the exercise scenario, the downed pilot was supposed to be conscious and mobile, requiring assistance, but not in critical condition. Rodriguez's sudden emphasis on medical urgency didn't match the planned exercise parameters. Viper 1, Hawk 7. Understand urgency. Can you provide more specific details on pilot's condition for medical team preparation? The silence that followed was longer than any normal radio pause. Sarah could hear background noise through Rodriguez's open microphone, voices of his Marines, the sound of movement, but no immediate response from Rodriguez himself. When his voice finally came back, there was something different about it, a quality that made Sarah's training and instincts suddenly alert to danger that had nothing to do with the exercise. Hawk 7, Viper 1. The pilot has significant injuries. Internal bleeding suspected. We need immediate extraction. Rodriguez's voice was becoming increasingly strained, and Sarah could hear something underneath his words that sounded almost like panic. Sarah keyed her radio, her own voice taking on the calm, professional tone she had learned to use when dealing with crisis situations. Viper 1, Hawk 7. Medical helicopter is inbound. Estimated arrival 10 minutes. Take a deep breath and give me a detailed status report on the pilot's condition. Hawk 7. Rodriguez's voice came through the radio, and this time Sarah could clearly hear the emotional distress. The pilot is just a kid. Maybe 22, 23 years old. Blood everywhere. Asking for his mother. Keeps saying he wants to go home. Something cold settled in Sarah's stomach. The scenario pilot was a 30-year-old staff sergeant who was supposed to be simulating minor injuries. Rodriguez was describing something entirely different, something that suggested his mind had shifted from the present exercise to some past experience that was bleeding through into current reality. Viper 1, Hawk 7. Sarah kept her voice steady, professional. I need you to look at the pilot again. Tell me what you actually see right now, in this moment. The radio silence stretched for almost 30 seconds before Rodriguez responded. Hawk 7, Viper 1. The pilot is Staff Sergeant Williams. He's conscious, minor cuts and bruises, no significant injuries. Rodriguez's voice was still shaky, but she could hear him struggling to regain control. Sarah realized that Rodriguez was experiencing some form of flashback or psychological episode triggered by the exercise scenario. She had seen similar reactions in other veterans, moments when current situations triggered powerful memories of past combat experiences. The professional in her knew she needed to manage the immediate situation while ensuring the safety of all personnel involved, but something deeper made her want to help Rodriguez through whatever he was experiencing. Viper 1, Hawk 7. Good copy. Extraction helicopter will be on station in 5 minutes. Take your time, ensure your perimeter is secure, and prepare for pickup. As Sarah continued coordinating the extraction, she found herself thinking about Rodriguez's personnel file, trying to remember details about his deployment history. She knew he had multiple combat tours, but she hadn't paid attention to specific dates or locations. Now she wondered what experiences had shaped the man she had been working with, what memories lay beneath his professional competence, what demons he might be carrying from battlefields she could only imagine. The extraction proceeded without further incident, but Sarah noticed that Rodriguez's radio communications remained subdued for the rest of the exercise. When the training concluded and all units returned to base for debriefing, she made a mental note to check on him, though she wasn't sure how to approach a fellow officer about what appeared to be a personal struggle with combat stress. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the California hills, Sarah gathered her equipment and prepared for the return to base, unaware that the day's events had set in motion a sequence of revelations that would transform her understanding of both Rodriguez and herself in ways she could never have anticipated. The exercise had been successful by all official measures, but something profound had shifted between them during those moments of crisis, something that would only become clear when hidden connections between their past experiences finally came to light. The debriefing session in the sterile conference room felt heavier than usual. Officers sat around a rectangular table reviewing tactical decisions and communication protocols while Sarah found herself constantly glancing at Rodriguez, who seemed to have retreated into himself since the morning's incident. His contributions to the discussion were minimal, professional, but lacking his usual analytical depth. Colonel Thompson praised both captains for their coordination and execution, but Sarah barely heard the commendations. Her mind kept returning to those moments when Rodriguez's voice had cracked over the radio, when past and present had somehow collided in ways that left him visibly shaken. After the formal debriefing concluded, Sarah lingered as other officers filed out, hoping for a chance to speak privately with Rodriguez. He was gathering his materials slowly, methodically, like someone trying to buy time or avoid conversation. When they were finally alone in the room, Sarah approached carefully, unsure how to begin a conversation about what she had witnessed. "Marcus," she said softly, using his first name for the first time. "Are you okay? What happened out there during the extraction phase?" Rodriguez looked up from his notes, his dark eyes meeting hers for just a moment before he glanced away. "I'm fine, Captain. Just got caught up in the moment. Sometimes exercises can feel too real, you know?" Sarah knew he was deflecting, but she also recognized the walls that combat veterans often built around their struggles. She had her own experiences with unwanted memories that surfaced at unexpected moments, nightmares that transported her back to dusty Afghan roads where every shadow could hide an enemy. But something about Rodriguez's episode felt different, more specific, as if the training scenario had triggered a very particular memory rather than general combat stress. "The pilot you described over the radio," Sarah said carefully. "Young kid, asking for his mother. That wasn't what we were seeing in the exercise." Rodriguez's hands stilled on his papers. For a long moment, he said nothing, and Sarah wondered if she had pushed too far, crossed some invisible line that would shut down any possibility of connection between them. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Afghanistan, 2019. We were running a similar extraction mission, real one, not an exercise. Apache helicopter went down in Taliban territory, crew of 2. Pilot was 23 years old, fresh out of flight school, married 3 months earlier." Rodriguez's jaw tightened. By the time we reached them, the co-pilot was already gone. The pilot, he lasted about 10 minutes after we got to him, kept asking for his wife, asking me to tell her he loved her. Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. "What was the pilot's name?" "Lieutenant Michael Thompson. We called him Tommy." Rodriguez finally looked directly at her. "Sweet kid, wanted to be a Marine aviator since he was 12. Had pictures of his wife in his flight suit, talked about the house they were going to buy when he got home." The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. She gripped the edge of the table, her mind racing through memories she had carefully compartmentalized for years. Lieutenant Michael Thompson. Tommy. She remembered his laugh, his terrible jokes, the way he always volunteered for the most dangerous missions because he wanted to prove himself worthy of his wings. "Where in Afghanistan?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "Helmand Province. Forward Operating Base Chapman. We were supporting operations out of there for about 6 months." Sarah's vision blurred slightly as the pieces clicked into place. FOB Chapman. She had been there. She had been the air support coordinator for that entire sector, the voice on the radio that guided rescue missions and coordinated medical evacuations. She remembered that day, the frantic radio calls, the desperate search for a downed aircraft, the terrible silence that followed when the rescue team finally reported their findings. "The call sign," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. "What was your call sign for that mission?" Rodriguez looked at her strangely, perhaps wondering why specific operational details mattered now. "Viper 1. Same as today, actually. I've used that call sign for most of my career." Sarah closed her eyes, the memory flooding back with devastating clarity. And the pilot's call sign was Sticky 6. He was part of a 2-aircraft mission, and his aircraft was designated Sticky 6. Rodriguez went completely still. "How do you know that?" "Because I was the air support coordinator that day. I was the voice on the radio, trying to guide you to the crash site. I was—" Sarah's voice broke slightly. "I was Hawk 7 that day, too." The silence in the room became profound, heavy with the weight of connection neither of them had realized existed. Rodriguez stared at her, his expression cycling through disbelief, recognition, and something deeper, a shared understanding of loss that transcended rank and professional relationships. "You were the one," Rodriguez said slowly, "who stayed on the radio with us for 6 hours. Who talked us through the grid coordinates when our GPS was malfunctioning. Who coordinated the medical helicopter that came to get Tommy's body." Sarah nodded, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "You were the ground commander who wouldn't give up. Who kept searching even when Control wanted to call off the mission after dark. Who carried Tommy back to the landing zone yourself, because you said no Marine gets left behind." Rodriguez ran his hands through his hair, the gesture making him look suddenly older, more vulnerable. "I never knew who you were. Just a voice on the radio, professional and calm, keeping us focused when everything was falling apart. I remember thinking that whoever Hawk 7 was, they were the kind of Marine I'd want backing me up in any situation." "Tommy was one of the good ones," Sarah said softly. "He used to bring coffee to the radio operators during night shifts. Always asked about our families back home. He was so excited about his wife, about their plans for after his deployment. He showed me pictures of their wedding," Rodriguez said. "Small ceremony in his hometown in Ohio. She was beautiful, looked at him like he hung the moon. He was going to surprise her with a trip to Hawaii when he got back." They sat in silence for several minutes, both lost in memories of a young pilot whose death had affected them more deeply than they had realized at the time. Sarah thought about all the missions she had coordinated, all the voices she had guided through dangerous situations, and wondered how many other connections existed that she would never know about. Rodriguez seemed to be wrestling with similar thoughts, the recognition that their paths had crossed in the most profound way possible, in a shared responsibility of trying to save a fellow Marine's life. "I blamed myself for a long time," Rodriguez finally said. "Thought if we had moved faster, if I had made better tactical decisions, maybe we could have gotten to him sooner." Sarah shook her head. The after-action report was clear. The aircraft took catastrophic damage from an RPG hit. There was nothing anyone could have done. "You did everything right, Marcus. You brought him home." "So did you," Rodriguez replied. "Your coordination kept us from getting lost in that maze of canyons. Without your guidance, we might never have found them." The realization was settling over both of them that their professional relationship had been built on a foundation neither had recognized, a shared tragedy that had shaped both their military careers. Sarah understood now why Rodriguez had seemed so familiar, why his voice had carried a quality she couldn't identify. On some unconscious level, she had recognized him as the ground commander who had fought so hard to save Tommy Thompson, just as he had recognized in her the steady professionalism that had guided him through one of the worst days of his military service. "The jokes about call signs," Sarah said suddenly, understanding flooding through her. "When you talked about seeing which category I fell into when things got real. You were testing me because you remembered Hawk 7, weren't you?" Rodriguez nodded slowly. "I've served with a lot of air support coordinators over the years, but I never forgot that voice. Professional, calm under pressure, never gave up even when the situation looked hopeless. When I read your personnel file and saw you had been deployed to Afghanistan during that time frame, I wondered if there was a connection, but I never imagined that we had shared the worst day of our careers without ever knowing each other's faces," Sarah finished. The conference room felt smaller somehow, as if the shared memory had drawn them into a space where past and present existed simultaneously. Sarah looked at Rodriguez with new understanding, seeing beneath his professional exterior to the Marine who had carried a dying pilot through enemy territory because it was the right thing to do, regardless of personal risk. Rodriguez, in turn, seemed to see her not just as a fellow officer, but as a voice that had guided him through darkness when he needed it most. "Tommy would have liked knowing we ended up serving together," Rodriguez said, a slight smile touching his lips for the first time since the morning's episode. "He would have made terrible jokes about it," Sarah agreed, remembering the young pilot's irrepressible sense of humor. "Probably would have said it was fate or destiny or some other romantic nonsense." As they prepared to leave the conference room, both carrying the weight of revealed connection and shared memory, neither could have anticipated how this moment of recognition would transform their professional relationship into something deeper, more complex, and ultimately more meaningful than either had imagined possible. The training exercise that had begun as a simple test of military competence had become something much more significant, a bridge between past trauma and present healing, between two Marines who had shared the burden of loss without knowing it, and who would now face the challenge of building trust and understanding on the foundation of their most difficult memories. The weeks that followed their revelation transformed the dynamics between Sarah and Marcus in ways that neither could have predicted. What had begun as professional wariness evolved into something deeper, not romantic, but rooted in the profound understanding that comes from shared trauma and mutual respect earned under the most difficult circumstances. They began taking their coffee breaks together, not discussing the weight of their discovered connection, but simply existing in the comfortable silence of two people who understood each other's burdens without need for explanation. Marcus's demeanor toward Sarah shifted completely. The testing, the careful observation, the subtle challenges, all of it disappeared, replaced by the easy collaboration of Marines who had proven themselves to each other when it mattered most. Sarah noticed that Marcus began seeking her input on tactical decisions, not because regulations required it, but because he genuinely valued her perspective. In return, Sarah found herself more willing to share her own experiences and uncertainties, knowing that Marcus understood the weight of command decisions in ways that transcended gender or politics. The change was noticed by others in their unit. Marines who had previously watched their interactions with curiosity now observed a partnership that functioned with remarkable efficiency and mutual trust. Colonel Thompson commented during one briefing that their coordination had become the gold standard for joint operations, though he seemed unaware of the personal history that underlay their professional excellence. It was during a quiet evening in late October that Marcus finally opened up about the broader impact of Tommy Thompson's death on his career and worldview. They were sitting in Sarah's office, reviewing plans for an upcoming training exercise, when Marcus set down his pen and leaned back in his chair with a heavy sigh. "You know," he said, staring at a point somewhere beyond the window, "losing Tommy changed everything for me. Made me question whether I was cut out for command, whether I had the right to make decisions that could cost young Marines their lives." Sarah looked up from her notes, recognizing the tone of someone wrestling with profound doubts. "But you continue to lead. You've had successful command assignments for years since then. I did continue, Marcus agreed, but I became harder, more demanding. I figured if I pushed everyone to be perfect, maybe I could prevent another tragedy like Tommy's. He turned to look directly at Sarah. That's why I was so difficult with you initially. I had convinced myself that the Corps was lowering standards, that political correctness was putting Marines at risk. I thought if I could prove that women couldn't handle the pressure, I'd be protecting everyone. Sarah felt a flash of old anger, but it was tempered by understanding. And what changed your mind? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. Realizing that the voice I had trusted most in my worst moment, the professional competence that had literally saved lives, belonged to a woman I was too stubborn to see clearly. If I had met you first in Afghanistan, if I had known Hawk 7 was Captain Sarah Mitchell, I never would have questioned your capabilities. He shook his head ruefully. I would have been asking for you to be assigned to every mission I commanded. Tommy's death wasn't your fault, Marcus, Sarah said gently, echoing words she had spoken weeks earlier, but with deeper understanding now. And neither was your response to it. We all process trauma differently. The fact that you channeled your grief into protecting other Marines, even if the method was flawed, shows the kind of leader you really are. What about you? Marcus asked. How did that day change you? Sarah considered the question, thinking back to the years since Afghanistan, the choices she had made, the wall she had built around her own vulnerabilities. I became obsessed with being perfect, never making a mistake, never showing weakness, always proving that I belonged. I thought if I could be flawless, I could prevent anyone from questioning my right to be here. She laughed softly, but without humor. Turns out we were both trying to control things that were beyond our control. Tommy would have hated knowing we spent years carrying guilt over something that wasn't our fault, Marcus observed. He would have been horrified, Sarah agreed. Remember how he used to lecture everyone about living in the moment, about not wasting time on regrets? As autumn deepened into winter, their friendship became a source of strength for both of them. Marcus found himself sleeping better, the nightmares that had plagued him for years occurring less frequently. Sarah discovered that she could be herself around Marcus in ways she hadn't allowed herself with other colleagues. Imperfect, uncertain sometimes, human rather than an image of female Marine perfection. Their professional partnership reached new heights of effectiveness. During a major training exercise in December, their coordination was so seamless that visiting officers from Marine Corps headquarters requested detailed briefings on their methods. Neither Sarah nor Marcus mentioned the personal history that enabled their intuitive understanding of each other's decision-making processes. It was during the Christmas holiday leave period that Marcus made a decision that surprised even him. Instead of flying back to Texas to visit family, he chose to remain at Camp Pendleton, volunteering for duty officer responsibilities that would keep the base running while most personnel were away. Sarah, who had planned to spend a quiet holiday alone rather than face her parents' well-meaning but exhausting questions about her personal life, found herself also volunteering for holiday duty. On Christmas Eve, as they conducted evening rounds of the nearly empty base, they found themselves walking past the memorial wall where the names of Marines killed in action were inscribed. Without discussion, they both stopped at the section dedicated to Afghanistan casualties, searching until they found the name they both remembered, Lieutenant Michael Thompson. I think about his wife sometimes, Sarah said quietly, tracing Tommy's name with her finger. Whether she remarried, whether she found happiness again, whether she knows how much her husband meant to the Marines who tried to save him. I wrote her a letter once, Marcus admitted, about 6 months after Tommy died. Told her about his last words, about how much he loved her, about what a good Marine he was. I never sent it. Wasn't sure if it would help or just make things worse. Maybe it's time, Sarah suggested. Maybe she deserves to know that Tommy's sacrifice mattered, that the people who were with him in his final moments still remember and honor his life. Marcus nodded slowly. Maybe we should write it together. You knew him too, knew what he meant to the mission, to the other aircrew. Between us, we could give her a complete picture of the Marine she married. That evening, in Sarah's office, they crafted a letter that neither could have written alone. Sarah provided memories of Tommy's humor and kindness, his excitement about his future with his wife, his dedication to his fellow Marines. Marcus shared details of Tommy's courage under fire, his concern for his aircrew, his final words of love. Together, they created a portrait of a young Marine whose brief life had touched more people than he could have imagined. The letter took several drafts, with both of them struggling to find words that would honor Tommy's memory, without reopening wounds that might have healed. When they finally finished, as dawn was breaking on Christmas morning, both Sarah and Marcus felt something they hadn't experienced in years, a sense of completion, of having finally honored their friend's memory in the way he deserved. "You know what Tommy would say if he could see us now?" Sarah asked as they prepared to mail the letter. Marcus smiled, the first genuinely happy expression she had seen from him since they met. "He'd probably make some joke about how it took us long enough to figure out we were on the same side. He'd definitely take credit for bringing us together," Sarah agreed. "Would have claimed he planned the whole thing from wherever Marines go when they die." As spring arrived at Camp Pendleton, Sarah and Marcus had developed a partnership that transcended their individual roles. They had become advocates for each other, professional allies who understood that their shared history had given them something rare in the military, a foundation of trust that didn't need to be continuously proven or defended. Other officers began to notice their effectiveness and sought to understand their methods. Neither Sarah nor Marcus revealed the full story of their connection, but they became known as examples of how Marines could overcome initial disagreements to build productive working relationships. Colonel Thompson recommended both for promotion, noting in their evaluation reports that their joint leadership had significantly improved unit readiness and morale. The letter to Tommy's widow, Maria Thompson, received a response 3 months later. She thanked them for reaching out, for sharing memories that helped her understand her husband's final days, and for the honor they had shown his memory. She had remarried, she wrote, and had a young daughter, but she had never forgotten the Marine who had been taken from her too soon. Knowing that Tommy was remembered and honored by his fellow Marines brought her a peace she hadn't realized she needed. Years later, both Sarah and Marcus would look back on their initial meeting as a turning point not just in their military careers, but in their understanding of leadership, trust, and the invisible connections that bind Marines together across time and circumstance. They had learned that prejudice and fear could blind even good people to obvious truths, but that genuine respect earned through shared sacrifice could overcome any barrier. Tommy Thompson had died believing in the core values of honor, courage, and commitment. In their own way, through their friendship and professional partnership, Sarah Mitchell and Marcus Rodriguez had proven that those values could transcend individual loss to create something meaningful and lasting. They had transformed their shared grief into mutual strength, their individual doubts into collective wisdom, and their respect for one fallen Marine into a legacy of leadership that would influence countless other Marines in the years to come. The call sign Sticky Six would never again be just a radio designation. For Sarah and Marcus, it would always represent the young pilot whose death had connected them across years, and Miles, whose memory had taught them that the most important battles are often fought not against external enemies, but against the prejudices and fears that keep good people from recognizing their natural allies. In honoring Tommy Thompson's memory, they had discovered not just professional partnership, but the deeper truth that the Marines they served alongside were more than colleagues. They were family, bound together by shared purpose and mutual sacrifice, stronger together than they could ever be alone.